What's up, boys? Gonna do another quick one of these question answering things. Got a bunch of good questions on the last one, so as always, if you have a question that you would like my opinion on, leave it in the comments of this video and I will get to it in the next one. So the first one was just, personally, I think your training is very interesting and enjoyable to watch, whether it be hypertrophy focused or strength focused. I would enjoy it either way. As you may have noticed, my previous video was just a really quick training summary of boring little deadlift day, and I plan to continue kind of doing that format of just throwing a couple clips of a couple exercises together and then putting my voice over it because I figured out how to do that. That being said, if there's anything I am excluding that you would like to see, or any changes to those videos you would like to see, leave them in the comments of those videos, and depending on how feasible they are, I will implement those changes. So the first question was, history behind your profile picture, or have you always had it and just kept it for a while? Wooper is my favorite Pokemon. I like Pokemon. Yeah, not really a deep one, but that is the answer. How much do you think being really stressed can affect someone's performance and recovery? Let's say they've been all stressed all week. Do you believe performance will be more or less affected by stress than by if one had bad sleep for a week? And how about if one had okay, so you're asking where stress falls in this hierarchy of variables. So he said, or if one had bad nutrition or hydration for a week. That's a good question. I am a big believer that the human body is very resilient and can perform at a very high level under very suboptimal circumstances. One thing that's kind of at least validated this thought in my mind is, as I've said many times, I'm a big fan of Carlos Reyes on Instagram. He is a full-time firefighter on top of being an elite powerlifter, so he has to keep in a really high aerobic condition, but that also means that he doesn't have perfect control of his variables or his stress. And he uses one of his many sayings is, fatigue is a liar. There are some days where on paper you should have the shittiest performance of your life. You should have to auto-regulate down very heavily, but in reality you have a great session. There's some intangibles there that it's very hard to point to why. There's certain days that all the variables point to I should have a shit day and then I have a great day. And that's why I never conclude that a session is going to be bad no matter what before I do it. I acknowledge that realistically, maybe if I have slept poorly for a week, as you mentioned, I might have to auto-regulate, but I leave myself open that potential to be pleasantly surprised instead of coming in with a really down and out look. As far as stress goes, unless it's a very, very extreme, say it's going to be nowhere near the effect of a straight week of poor sleep. One study I found basically said that one night of poor sleep doesn't have too big of an effect. I believe it was conducted on weightlifters. One night of poor sleep, or little sleep, or maybe it was no sleep, had little to no effect on their performance, but two drastically killed their performance. So if it's one day, I wouldn't worry too much. If it's many days in a row, yeah, it's definitely going to bite into your performance. I'd say that's a very big one. Nutrition, a little bit less so, and hydration somewhere between the two. If you're acutely dehydrated, good luck performing well, and your injury risk is going to be higher. But bad nutrition, you could be pretty not adherent with your diet for a whole week, but if you've been sleeping, you've been hydrating, you've been training hard, you might still adapt given your level. So I'd say it's relatively low on that hierarchy, bar extreme cases. So it's better to be mildly stressed than it is to be mildly off your diet, or especially be sleeping mildly badly. I hope I didn't babble too much. That's definitely a complex question, and stress of those things is a tricky one because the absence of stress, you're not going to train, right? So the absence of stress is bad for your mind, it's bad for your body, and too much is also bad. So it's definitely something where you have to try to be in the middle. Yeah, I don't know. Sorry for babbling so much on that one. That's definitely something I have put a lot of thought into over the years. Are there any recent training, quote, trends, speed work, bands, chains, different types of belts, etc., that you find scientifically and by experience yield good results? Okay, so I'm going to preface this with and say most training trends aren't scientifically validated. That's not to say that they're wrong. It's just that we as strength athletes don't exactly get a whole lot of funding as far as research goes. So what we have somewhat conclusive scientific findings on findings on is pretty limited, and especially when it comes to really specific training modalities like that. That being said, so I'm gonna wipe scientifically off the board. Because like there's all these things also that if you went and you got a degree in exercise science and then maybe even pursued a post grad and you never train, there are certain training things that you might think on paper are optimal. So if you were to try to write someone a program based on the knowledge you got from school without any practical knowledge, there are certain things that you're going to think are the shit, such as like super maximal weighted negatives, stuff like that on paper are going to sound phenomenal. But without practical application and the difficulty of fitting some of those things into a program, you're going to find that there's issues that you didn't know would arise. So I would say that that's kind of my answer to scientifically. Is there's certain things that on paper, physiologically, we could say are great, or maybe, using the examples you used, bands or chains matching the strength curve up to or matching the weight curve up to the strength curve of the exercise, i.e. as you get farther up in the bench press, you're in a mechanically more and more advantageous position, so you may as well move more weight. On paper, that's phenomenal, but in practical application, more times than not, it's unnecessary or just not the best use of time. Much the same, speed work sounds really good on paper, but in practical application might not be perfect. So in my experience, I don't know, I do like the wave of tempo work and pauses becoming more prevalent. I think that's really good, both as a strength building tool, but more importantly as a position building tool. Stopping in certain portions of the lift or going slow through certain portions of the lift. Build strength. That's good and dandy. Controlled negatives are definitely effective strength building tool. But the other thing that the way I think about pausing or going slowly through a portion of the ROM is you're going to have to really make sure you're in sustainable positions. If there is a part of the negative that you tend to dump the weight through because you're not in a sustainable position, a slow negative will really expose and force you to fix that. Much the same if you're in a position on the squat and you're kind of relying on momentum to get through that position, I would say that's suboptimal. You should be able to generate force from any position rather than try to use momentum to carry you through a portion. That'll be exposed very quickly by if you pause there or if you do a tempo. So I guess those are two training trends I think are generally pretty good. Man, very long-winded video. I apologize. Thoughts on using super maximal loads such as slingshot, pin, board press, pin squats, heavy squat walkouts, static holds. Generally speaking, I favor away from them. I think strength can be very effectively built submaximally, and if you're struggling to express the strength that you built submaximally, usually the remedy is going to be improving your technique, making your training a little bit higher specificity. Because if you've prepared really well in that 70 to 85% range, you should have a lot of confidence going into those high percentages. If your training specificity was high enough that you're very confident in your technical proficiency, you're going to be confident in your strength. I don't think touching heavy weights is necessary. This is something that I have somewhat changed my opinion on, because I used to implement some boards and some slingshot, and I just noticed that so many good lifters never are touching super maximal weights. So at the very least, I found it to be unnecessary based on that. Right? And from there, I'm like, okay, well, so if this isn't necessary, is there a distinct benefit I can get from it that I couldn't get from preparing better at the submaximal weights? I found no. I've had two of the best bench blocks in my life, 2 in a row. I believe I went from 505 to 525 and then to 535. So it's a very fast rate of progress for 2 blocks for someone at my level. And I did not touch a super maximal weight the entire time. I did probably 95+% of both of those blocks below 95%. And the biggest thing for me was developing my technical proficiency so that I had confidence at those high loads and upping my specificity through the blocks so that I'm very confident within my technique coming into the heavyweights. That being said, if someone's a total head case, sometimes I do throw in a heavy walkout on the squat, maybe a heavy hold on the bench, maybe a slingshot, used really sparingly. When I use them, I'm not using them for a training effect as much so as a psychological effect 9 times out of 10. Board presses, on the other hand, I think can be helpful, but not necessarily for overload. More so targeting specific muscles, namely the triceps, avoiding using excessive momentum off the chest. If you're someone with a really strong chest and weak triceps, you can kind of cheat your close grip work by generating a lot of speed out of the bottom. So it forces you to generate the speed from a higher point up. make you rely on the triceps a little bit more. Or the other thing is, performing close grip or regular, you might find that even on a close grip bench, your shoulders fatiguing or your chest fatiguing limits you in the set. And if you're doing that exercise specifically to target your triceps, maybe removing that bottom range of motion so that your triceps are what is limiting you, or like the rate limiter on the exercise, can be beneficial. Again, long-winded, very cool. Is training grip necessary? Do you believe grip strength will build as you get stronger? For the vast majority of people, I don't think you'll develop a grip issue if you just never use straps. That being said, at a certain level, that sometimes isn't the case anyway. I know some guys who never use straps and still have a grip issue, in which case you would add it in, but it's absolutely not necessary. And when it is necessary, it only usually comes about at a relatively high level. It's pretty rare for intermediate people to have a grip issue unless they're reliant on straps. That being said, straps can be a legitimate training tool, blah, blah, blah. Usual caveats. In my opinion, if you pull mixed grip, you should just be mixed gripping everything. It's specific. It's going to avoid a inevitable issue for a lot longer than you would otherwise. If you do hook, straps are largely a necessary evil, but that being said, I think people are really reliant on them. It's not real, unless your hands are completely tacoed, there is not really good reason to be doing your top work in them below like 3 reps, in my opinion. I think it just is setting yourself up to shockingly drop your third. Be like, oh, I never had this issue in training when I was wearing straps. But I digress. Okay, so this was actually... Dude asked this question in the earlier one. These are great questions, by the way. I appreciate it. How do you determine MRV, since it could be constantly changing due to general life stresses? Also, any quantifiable ways to measure fatigue other than RPE? For example, Mike Israel mentions using a cheap hand grip dynamometer to compare grip strength against baseline. Okay, so great questions. As far as the MRV one, this is one of those ones, again, that I think if you think about it conceptually, that problem seems pretty significant. Like, how do you auto-regulate MRV? But in practical application, if you are a advanced lifter and you are good at controlling your other variables, right? If you are good at, even on a rough day, you're getting in your meals, you are hydrating well, and you are sleeping to the best of your ability, your MRV, and the only thing that's going to be undulating is going to be your stress, external stressors. I think the impact that is going to have on your MRV is going to be pretty minuscule. And I am a big advocate of training not right at MRV, but just slightly below it, because I think that's plenty to drive a good rate of progression. That accounts for those fluctuations where we still would need to auto-regulate. Maybe, MRV comes down a little bit because of general life stresses. It'll probably be at where we're at. It would have to be pretty severe to dip below generally where I hold people. That being said, if it does happen, I think that person would probably just text me and say, hey, I'm going through a divorce this week. Can we do less? I'd be like, yeah. But bar extreme circumstances, I think that you don't have to do a whole lot of auto-regulation there. And as far as quantifiable ways to measure RPE, so I can tell from the hand grip dynamometer that you're thinking objective measures, but there's also numerical subjective measures that I find very helpful. So, recording. Ooh, my bad. So recording a perceived fatigue rating, a perceived motivation rating, numerical on a scale of 1 to 10, can be a very helpful metric to track. And it is numerical, and just because it's not entirely objective doesn't mean it's useless. I think that's a bias that people have against certain data metrics, is that they're not completely objective, but as you get more advanced and you get more consistent with your assessments, those become more and more valuable numbers. But that being said, another great tool can be using bar speed acceleration, using one of those things that tie to the bar. Those can be definitely an interesting tool for gauging your fatigue. You kind of have general speed parameters or general percentages, and when you fall significantly below those on your first rep, you're pretty heavily fatigued, especially if you perform like singles to begin your training. You can tell a lot from those. And then that kind of brings me to my other one, which is if you do hit singles prior to your training, that'll kind of give you a read on fatigue, and you can base your work off of that single. Not always the friendliest way to train as far as fatigue goes, but it is a valid way. Steadily gaining weight, at most 1 pound a week, and getting stronger, but my daily walk at work 5 days a week and 10-minute walk no longer cut it, and I find myself out of breath after working sets, especially with squat. Should I start doing jump rope or just walk more? Do you have any problems with this? Well, I just keep on top of my cardio. I don't just walk. I like doing some dedicated cardio, and I would recommend you do too. I think that walking is plenty to get you a lot of the benefits of a high NEAT as far as recovery goes, but it won't get you in great shape. Back to citing Carlos, walking isn't cardio. Nobody would prepare for a sporting event by walking. That being said, it doesn't have to be super high scale. Just make it a little bit more aggressive until it meets your goals, right? So, all right, walking isn't enough. I probably don't want to bang up my joints, especially while I'm gaining weight by running. So I'd probably introduce a rower, a stair climber, or a stationary bike, especially a wind bike if you have them. Those I find are all great conditioning tools that are pretty accessible. You can build a pretty damn high aerobic capacity on them without beating up your joints at all. And basically what you're going to do is you're just going to add a little bit and a little bit and a little bit, and you find, okay, what's the minimum I can do to achieve my goal of being in better shape, and not do more than that so it doesn't detract from my recovery capabilities for training. I think you might find that if you're getting winded just walking around and doing sets, you probably doing this cardio will benefit you and increase your recovery capacity and allow you to handle more volume per session, so it's not really going to dig into your recovery in that regard for quite a while of building. Do you drink water during your meals, or do you drink your meal around your meals and not during? Ideally, you drink your water away from your meals. Just something John Meadows has mentioned a couple times, that if you are ingesting fluid while you eat, it can be a little bit rough on your digestion. So if you're someone who struggles with that, I might try separating your fluid intake from your meals. But that being said, I drink all of my fluid other than my intra-workout drink with my meals, just because it's easy for me to remember. I don't forget meals, but I forget to drink all the time. So I just kind of do them together. So I'll have coconut water, milk, or water with each of my meals. Direct direct grip work carry over to deadlift? Only if deadlift is limited by grip. If grip isn't the fixed limiting thing on your deadlift, it will not carry over directly. It can be a good investment if you enjoy doing it, or you suspect a oncoming grip issue. So I've read this one a couple times beforehand. I'm trying to make sure I understand what it's saying, but I don't want to fuck it up. So, do you think ribs must be stacked on top of the pelvis, especially for lifters with really bad good morning leverages, or is some degree of slight freedom okay? Okay, so deciphering this, not to be rude, just making sure I understand. Bad good morning leverages. I'm assuming you mean you have long limbs, but also, plenty of long-limbed people don't good morning their squats. So having sufficient trunk and quad strength goes a long way for fixing that. So I wouldn't necessarily blame it on your leverages. Second, I'm assuming you mean locking your ribs down rather than opening your ribs. So you're saying like relatively neutral spine versus squatting from extension. Is it okay for me to open at my ribs while I'm squatting and be in a slight extension? Man, I'm generally going to recommend against it. I think that kind of goes against the fundamentals of good bracing, where you want to breathe into your diaphragm. You want to expand in 360 degrees, pushing forward into your belt, sideways into your obliques, backwards into your back. You want to tuck your pelvis slightly. And then what you're doing is when you brace, you lock down your ribs, you pressurize in here, yada, yada, yada. And what you're doing is you're fixing the relationship between your rib cage and your pelvis, right? So if this is your pelvis standing straight up and down, and this is your rib cage, you're fixing them so they move together during a hinge, right? What you're suggesting is these are moving independently, right? So you're going to go into extension as you squat. I'm generally going to recommend against that. I don't think it's innately dangerous. I don't think there's evidence to suggest that loaded spinal extension, if you're adequately prepared for the loads, is all that dangerous. But that being said, I don't think it's mechanically the best way to lift the most weight. Last two. Benefits of using something like fat grips. Your grip is going to get stronger. It's not going to carry over all that well to your power lift unless your deadlift is directly limited by your grip strength. If your bench is limited by forearm strength, I think you just need to work on where you're setting the bench in your hand and cue squeezing the bar aggressively for a couple of training blocks, and your forearms will get sufficiently strong from that. But that being said, it's a great way to build up some extra grip strength without having to do additional work, just by attaching fat grips to an exercise you would otherwise be performing to hit two birds with one stone. And then, there's the other one that is a little bit of a doozy to understand. No offense to you. Since training style does not matter at the elite level, I think this is a misinterpretation of something I said. As any training style is good, do you think that someone with genetic elite will thrive doing anything, and does that same thing work for the average person? Just wondering because I heard top level guys using basic programs like 5x5 and wanted your thoughts on it. Again, thanks again. Okay. A couple of misunderstandings here in my opinion. Break it down. Training style does not matter at the highest level. It 100% does. You won't get stronger unless your training is pretty optimized to you as an individual as you get more elite. That being said, what I think you're thinking of is I always say that a lot of different training styles can be done very well at a high level. I think that you can get stronger at an elite level doing conjugate. I think you can, like even conjugate, but especially other more conventional training methods. I think that they can all be used to make you better as long as you follow some fundamental programming principles, right? So as long as you're not violating fundamental principles of programming, the exact style in which you implement them, and however that might look, a wide variety of them can absolutely work. So that's my first caveat is it can work, but that doesn't mean anything works. It has to be a good conjugate program or a good linear or a good block or whatever it may be, that's tailored to the individual, because the amount that the program is tailored to the individual increases as you get more and more advanced, because you can hand a beginner a cookie cutter program and they can run it verbatim and see progress, and as they get more advanced it has to be adjusted a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, and that's why elite programs have a lot more variance from person to person than maybe beginner programs do, and that's not a bad thing. And then you said, do the genetic elite will thrive doing anything? Does the same thing work for the average person? Okay, so the genetic elite will thrive until they get advanced, which numerically might be a bigger total than someone else, but just like a normal person, they'll hit a point where the program can't just be anything. It has to be intelligently designed. And much the same, the average person will hit that same point, maybe in the same amount of time. It's just the total looks a little bit different. The lifts that they hit that point are a little bit different, right? So we'll just take... we'll just use my brother, right? Let's say Max was doing some dumb fucking training or generic training that was like a bit suboptimal, right? Max might not have to start to get his shit together and like really make it intelligent until he squatted like 550, right? He still has to do that to get past that point in any reasonable amount of time, and the average person might have hit that point at 450 or 400 before they really have to start dialing things in. But that being said, being genetically elite doesn't mean just infinite progress doing anything. It's just, the scaling looks different. And then you said you heard of top-level guys using basic program like 5x5. Want to know your thoughts. Thanks again. No offense, I don't think there's many top-level guys using basic programs. And if they are pretty heavily modified to their unique demands. Just trying to think of a couple people. Like I've heard for a long time, Jackson Powell was running 531, and now he works with Walls of Jericho Training. Very solid coach, seeing good progress. He made it very far using 531, just as we talked about earlier. But eventually, you hit a point that it needs to become more intelligent. He hit that point, and he got a coach. But that being said, he made it really far doing 531. But 531 is a program that can scale very well to. From beginner guys to advanced guys, especially advanced guys, because the volume's a little bit low, and advanced guys generally to be using a little bit lower volume, especially the stronger ones. So I think it can scale very well. So I'd say that's an example. Or like I know Joe Penna used like roughly 5x5s, but again, it's like the way he's approaching it, like the frequency, The fact that all the sets aren't necessarily straight sets, or maybe it's 3 sets instead of 5 sets. It's very tailored to him because he's a very unique individual. So, he can say he's doing 5x5, but it's not 5x5 as it's written. I don't think any top guy is using a pre-written program. Yeah, that's my take. Long video. Sorry for the babbling. I'm fucking exhausted, but I hope you guys enjoy.